Kendrick Lamar just ended the game's entire career with a single recording. A leaked vault tape from 15 years ago is tearing through the internet right now, exposing lies, betrayal, and the most calculated revenge plot hip-hop has ever witnessed. The game's legacy is imploding as we speak. Everybody thought they knew the story about the game and Kendrick Lamar. Game told the world for over a decade that he discovered Kendrick first, that he wanted to sign him before anyone else, that he was the visionary who saw greatness in the kid from Compton. That was the version everyone repeated. Interviews, podcasts, documentaries, Game painted himself as Kendrick's almost mentor, the one that got away. But now, a 6-minute confession from Kendrick's personal vault titled "The Realest Joker Alive" just violently surfaced, and the whole narrative is twisting. This isn't just a diss track, this is time-stamped evidence, and it's destroying everything Game ever claimed. Let me break down exactly what Kendrick revealed in this recording, because this is where everything gets absolutely insane. In the track, Kendrick takes us back to when he was a 12th grader, just a kid with dreams, trying to make it out of Compton. He reveals that he handed his mixtape to someone claiming to be the game's close associate. The promise was simple: I'll get this to Game, you might get your big break. Think about that. A 17-year-old Kendrick Lamar putting his heart into a tape, believing this might be his moment. What happened next will honestly make you angry. Nothing. Complete radio silence. No callback, no interest, no response whatsoever. Kendrick was ghosted at his most vulnerable moment, when one cosign from an established West Coast rapper could have literally changed his entire trajectory. But here's where it gets darker and way more personal. Years later, Kendrick runs into that same guy, and the man confesses the horrifying truth that's been eating at him. He tells Kendrick straight up, Game said he didn't like it. He thought you were trash. Let that sink in for a second. The Game heard young Kendrick Lamar, arguably the greatest lyricist of this entire generation, and called him whack, rejected him, dismissed his talent completely. Now TMZ and multiple hip-hop sources confirmed the audio was legitimate. Fans online turned into full-blown investigators the moment this dropped. They're slowing down frames, analyzing timestamps, cross-referencing interviews Game did over the years, and guess what they found? Game told the "I wanted to sign Kendrick first" story at least 17 different times across various platforms. 17 times he repeated a lie that Kendrick just obliterated with receipts. Online detectives took this to a whole new level. They started studying Kendrick's tone throughout the song, the specific names he drops, the dates he references. And folks online swear this was recorded around 2010 or 2011 based on the production style and the artists he mentions. That means Kendrick has been sitting on this nuclear weapon for over 15 years, just waiting for the perfect moment to detonate it. But it gets even crazier when you listen to how Kendrick delivers these revelations. Throughout the entire song, he uses one word that cuts deeper than any insult or diss bar ever could. That word is anyway. Listen to the icy dismissiveness in these lines. Game attacked another artist for no reason, still no legitimate answer. Anyway. Never responded to the tape, never got a response. Anyway. Took Kendrick on tour years later, then vanished without explanation. We didn't see him again. Anyway. This isn't anger. This isn't even a diss. This is documented contempt. Kendrick is systematically recounting every single slight, every disappointment, every moment Game failed him or disrespected him, and then moving on like it's beneath his concern. But it clearly did matter, and now the entire world knows exactly what happened. The leaked footage people are analyzing isn't just the audio. Screenshots of old text messages between TDE members are circulating, showing they've known about this recording for years. Punch from TDE immediately co-signed the leak on Twitter with a simple tweet that said, "Finally." That one word confirms everything. This wasn't an accidental leak. This was a strategic execution that's been planned for possibly over a decade. Fans compared every interview Game ever did about Kendrick to the timeline Kendrick provides in the song. The math isn't mathing. Game claims he reached out in 2009. Kendrick's tape suggests it was way earlier, and Game rejected it. Then Game supposedly took Kendrick on tour in 2011, but according to Kendrick's lyrics, that's when the real distance started. Game was nowhere to be found during the actual grind years. And for anyone who doesn't know the full context here, understand this. The Game has built a significant part of his legacy on being connected to Kendrick's rise. He's used that story to maintain relevance, to position himself as a West Coast visionary, to claim he spotted greatness before Dr. Dre did. That entire narrative just got shattered into a million pieces with 6 minutes of Kendrick calmly telling the truth. People are calling this the most savage long Game revenge in rap history. Kendrick literally recorded proof of Game's lies years ago, knowing that one day he'd need it.
That level of patience, that level of strategic thinking is honestly terrifying when you really think about it. Now, let's get into the motive, because this is where everything starts clicking into place and the psychology behind this entire situation becomes crystal clear. The game has been dealing with some serious credibility issues for a while now. His career didn't exactly maintain that early momentum. Think about it. This dude went from being one of the biggest names in West Coast hip-hop, dropping classics like The Documentary back in 2005, to becoming known more for social media antics and controversy than actual music impact. That's a harsh reality to face. Back in his peak years, people say Game was pulling in millions from album sales, tours, and endorsements. He was legitimately one of the faces of West Coast rap. But fast forward to recent years, and the reports paint a different picture. His album sales declined significantly, his tours got smaller, the relevance started fading in a genre that moves fast and doesn't wait for anyone. Meanwhile, Kendrick Lamar became arguably the most respected rapper alive. Multiple Grammys, including the Pulitzer Prize, critically acclaimed albums that changed hip-hop, worldwide tours, selling out arenas, billions of streams, the complete opposite trajectory from Game's career path. That kind of contrast hits different when you in the same city, came up in the same era, and you allegedly had a chance to be part of that success story early on. Put all that together, and it starts looking like the perfect recipe for resentment and revisionist history. Here's what likely happened based on all the evidence and timelines people have constructed. Game heard Kendrick's early work and genuinely didn't see the vision. That's not even that crazy. Plenty of A&Rs and executives missed on future superstars. It happens. But instead of just admitting, yeah, I didn't see it back then, my bad, Game decided to flip the script entirely. He started telling a story where he was the one who recognized the talent first, where he wanted to work with Kendrick before anyone else, where he was almost the mentor that launched that legendary career. Why would someone do that? Ego, legacy, relevance. If you can attach yourself to Kendrick Lamar's origin story, you stay in the conversation. You become a footnote in hip-hop history. You get mentioned in documentaries. You maintain a certain level of respect and attention that your recent music might not be generating anymore. And it gets worse for Game when you realize how often he told this lie. Not just once or twice in passing. He built entire interview segments around it. He'd go on podcasts and spend 20 minutes talking about the time I almost signed Kendrick, or when I first heard K-Dot and knew he was special. He'd name drop Kendrick to boost his own credibility, to remind people that he's been around, that he has an ear for talent, that he's part of that West Coast legacy. But Kendrick wasn't having it anymore. And here's where the revenge aspect becomes truly diabolical. Kendrick didn't respond immediately when Game started telling these stories years ago. He didn't send shots on tracks. He didn't do interviews calling Game a liar. He just recorded his version of events, dated it, kept it in the vault, and waited. That's some Godfather-level patience right there. The psychology of this is fascinating. Kendrick understood something crucial. If you respond too quickly, it becomes a he said situation. But if you wait, if you let the liar tell the story over and over again, dig themselves deeper and deeper into the narrative, and then you drop time-stamped evidence that contradicts everything, the impact is catastrophic. It's the difference between calling someone a liar and proving they're a liar with their own words compared to your documented evidence from 15 years ago. Fans online started pulling up old Kendrick interviews where he talks about his come-up, and guess what name is suspiciously absent from those stories? The Game. Kendrick would thank Dr. Dre, thank Top Dawg, thank his TDE family, mention other West Coast artists who helped him, but never Game. That silence was loud, but people didn't connect the dots until now. One fan perfectly summarized it on Twitter. Game was early on Kendrick, like someone showing up to a sold-out concert and claiming, I knew this was be-packed. That's exactly what this is. Game showed interest after Kendrick was already buzzing without his help, then rewrote history to make it seem like he was there from the beginning. And let's talk about the West Coast power dynamics here, because that's crucial context. The Game came up under Dr. Dre and 50 Cent. He had major machine backing. Kendrick came up through the underground, through TDE, through genuine grassroots respect for his lyricism. Two completely different paths. If Game had actually co-signed Kendrick early and helped him, that would be a legendary story. But he didn't. And now trying to claim that legacy after the fact, that's what people in the streets call culture vulture behavior. The motive is clear. Game wanted to be part of a success story he had nothing to do with. He wanted the credit without doing the work. And Kendrick just exposed that in the most brutal, undeniable way possible. But here's the part that really hits different when you listen to the full recording with context. The one who got emotionally caught up in the middle of all this was young Kendrick.
This was a kid who grew up in Compton, surrounded by gang violence and poverty, using music as his only real escape and path to something better. And he believed in the process. He believed that if he was good enough, if he worked hard enough, if he handed his tape to the right person, he'd get a fair shot. That's messed up when you really think about it. The leaked audio captures something beyond just facts and timelines. You can hear the lingering disappointment in Kendrick's delivery, even years later when he recorded this. There's a section where he talks about handing over that mixtape with genuine hope, and you can feel the weight of what that moment meant to a 17-year-old kid with dreams. That's somebody's younger self being rejected at a crucial moment, dealing with the psychological impact of being told you're not good enough by someone you respected, and then having to watch that same person later try to claim credit for your success. That kind of emotional manipulation and revisionist history does real damage. But what makes this even more powerful is how Kendrick handles it in the song. He doesn't scream, he doesn't rage, he just calmly, methodically explains what happened. That restraint is somehow more devastating than any aggressive diss could be. It shows growth, maturity, and confidence that he doesn't need to yell to be heard. There's a moment in the track where Kendrick mentions Nipsey Hussle, and his voice gets noticeably more emotional. He says, "They didn't take you away, they made you forever." And you can hear genuine love and pain in those words. Fans online have been clipping that specific moment, and people are sobbing over the raw vulnerability. Because that's the real Kendrick showing through, not the calm, calculated assassin, but the human being who feels deeply, who honors his fallen friends, who carries the weight of his community and his journey. The contrast between how Kendrick talks about Nipsey versus how he talks about Game is striking. With Nipsey, there's warmth and reverence. With Game, there's cold distance and factual recounting. That tells you everything you need to know about who actually supported Kendrick and who just tried to ride the wave later. This isn't just industry drama. This is about a young artist's journey, the people who helped versus the people who hindered, and the emotional scars that come from being dismissed and then having someone try to rewrite that painful history for their own benefit. The internet is really connecting with this emotional layer. Comments like, "Kendrick remembered every person who doubted him," and "This is what happens when you underestimate someone and they remember," are going viral because people relate to that feeling of being overlooked and then watching the person who overlooked you try to claim they supported you all along. That betrayal hits different, and Kendrick just made sure the world understands exactly how it felt. Now, this whole situation gets even crazier when you realize the sheer amount of evidence Kendrick embedded into this one song. He didn't just tell a story, he created a forensic document that hip-hop historians are going to study for years. Let's break down all the specific names and references Kendrick drops throughout The Realest Niggas Alive, because each one serves as a piece of the puzzle that completely destroys Game's narrative. Kendrick name drops Nipsey Hussle, Tech Nine, J-Rock, Glasses Malone, and several other West Coast artists. These aren't random mentions. These are the people who actually supported Kendrick during his come-up. He's creating a documented list of who was really there versus who showed up later trying to claim credit. And notice who's conspicuously absent from that list: the Game. Fans online have been cross-referencing every name Kendrick mentions against old tour dates, mixtape features, and interview shoutouts from that era. And guess what? The timeline checks out perfectly. All these artists Kendrick mentions have documented history with him between 2008 and 2011. Meanwhile, Game has nothing substantial from that period. He only started publicly associating with Kendrick around 2012, after Good Kid, Mad City was already creating massive buzz. Online detectives on Reddit literally built spreadsheets tracking this. One post that went viral shows a timeline with 2 columns: artists Kendrick thanked in early interviews and artists who claimed they helped Kendrick later. Game appears in the second column, but not the first. That's damning evidence right there. But let's talk about the specific incident Kendrick describes in detail. He mentions going to a studio session where Game was supposedly recording. This is years after the initial mixtape rejection. Kendrick says they took him on tour briefly. He thought maybe the relationship was improving, but then nothing again. Game disappeared from his life without explanation, just ghosted him completely. Now, Game has never told this part of the story in his interviews. He always focuses on the "I wanted to sign him" narrative, but conveniently leaves out the part where he apparently brought Kendrick around, got his hopes up, and then vanished.
That's a crucial detail that completely changes the story from "we almost worked together" to "he played with my emotions and opportunities multiple times." Fans started digging through old Game interviews with timestamps, looking for any mention of Kendrick before 2012. There's nothing. No interviews where Game says, "I'm working with this kid K. Dot from TDE." No studio photos, no features, no public cosigns. Just complete silence until Kendrick was already undeniably buzzing. And then suddenly Game remembers, "Oh yeah, I discovered him first." The audio quality of Kendrick's vault recording is also being analyzed. Music producers online are examining the production style, the mixing techniques, the vocal quality. Multiple experts on forums are confirming this sounds consistent with recording technology and Kendrick's vocal development from around 2010 or 2011. That means this isn't something he recorded recently to respond to Game. This is legitimately from that era, which makes it even more powerful as evidence.
There's also a line in the song where Kendrick hints at an almost beef involving Bishop Lamont, The Game, and potentially Lil Wayne. He doesn't fully explain it, just mentions almost getting into major beef over a situation involving those names. And now the entire internet is hunting for that story. Fans are diving into old diss tracks, looking for references to 2009, 2010 West Coast drama, trying to piece together what Kendrick is referring to. Some people think it might be related to the Spiderlock situation or the 400 Bars drama from that era, but nobody has the complete story yet. That's a loaded gun just sitting there, waiting to explode when someone connects all the dots. And you know Kendrick didn't mention it randomly. He's calculated, he's strategic. There's more to that story that might come out soon. Meanwhile, Punch from TDE has been retweeting fan theories and evidence compilations, essentially confirming, yes, this is all real, yes, we've had this recording forever, yes, we're tired of Game lying. TDE doesn't move randomly. They're one of the most strategic labels in hip-hop. This coordinated release with Punch immediately co-signing, that's an institutional decision to destroy Game's credibility permanently. 2Ts from TDE called cap on Game's story weeks ago on social media. Now we know why he was so confident. He had access to this vault recording the whole time. This was a coordinated ambush. They let Game keep telling the lie, knowing they had the receipts ready to drop at any moment. And here's something people are just starting to realize. Kendrick does this to everyone who crosses him. The Drake battle, Kendrick had information and strategy prepared for months before Euphoria dropped. The Control verse, that wasn't spontaneous. That was calculated positioning. This is how Kendrick operates. He watches, he documents, he waits for the perfect moment, and then he strikes with overwhelming force that leaves no room for debate. One viral tweet summed it up perfectly. Kendrick kept receipts in MP3 format. This man is terrifying. And honestly, that's facts. This is psychological warfare at the highest level. Game thought he was safe telling his version of history. He had no idea Kendrick was sitting on time-stamped audio evidence from 15 years ago, just waiting for the right moment to deploy it. Let's keep it real and talk about some of the side stories and additional context that make this situation even more complex and layered than it initially appears. First, we need to discuss Game's pattern of behavior, because this Kendrick situation is not an isolated incident. Game has a documented history of inserting himself into other people's narratives and then creating drama when it doesn't go his way. Remember the whole situation with 50 Cent? Game was brought into G-Unit by 50 and Dr. Dre, had massive success with the documentary, and then within a year they had one of the biggest rap beefs in history. Game claimed 50 was jealous of his success. 50 claimed Game was disloyal and ungrateful. But when you look at the pattern, Game consistently positions himself as the victim or the visionary who was wronged by others, even when the evidence suggests otherwise. Or look at the Meek Mill situation from a few years ago. Game randomly started going at Meek, claiming all sorts of things, and Meek had to respond like, "Bro, I don't even know why you're involving me in this." It felt manufactured, like Game was creating controversy to stay relevant in the conversation. And that's the thing people are realizing now with this Kendrick revelation. Game has been using other artists' names and creating narratives around them for years to maintain his relevance. Kendrick just happens to be the biggest name he tried this strategy with and the only one with receipts to completely dismantle the lie. Fans online started creating compilations of every time the game claimed he discovered someone or wanted to work with them first, and the list is honestly kind of sad. It shows a pattern of someone desperately trying to stay connected to success stories they had minimal involvement in. But here's where it gets interesting from a psychological perspective. Some people in the comments are actually feeling bad for Game now, not because he's right, but because this public dismantling is so thorough, so brutal, and so permanent that it's hard to watch anyone's legacy get destroyed in real time like this. One comment that got thousands of likes said, "I don't agree with Game lying, but Kendrick really waited 15 years to drop a nuke on this man's entire career. That's cold-blooded." And honestly, that's facts. This is psychological warfare at the highest level. Game thought he was safe telling his version of history. He had no idea Kendrick was sitting on time-stamped audio evidence from 15 years ago, just waiting for the right moment to deploy it.
Personally, I think Kendrick waited this long specifically because he wanted to give Game multiple chances to stop telling the lie. He probably hoped Game would just move on and stop bringing up the Kendrick discovery story. But Game kept going back to that well, kept telling that story, and eventually Kendrick decided enough is enough. And there's another layer here that people are discussing. What does this mean for the Game's existing fan base? He still has millions of fans who grew up on the documentary and Doctor's Advocate. Those are legitimate classic albums. Does this situation erase all of that? Most people seem to agree, no, Game's music legacy is separate from this situation. But his credibility as someone who spots talent, someone who can be trusted to tell true stories about the industry, someone who was integral to the West Coast resurgence, that's permanently damaged now. One YouTuber doing a reaction video said something that stuck with me. Game's music will always be respected, but nobody will ever believe a Game story again without receipts. And that's probably the long-term impact of this. Every time Game tells a story now, people will immediately ask, is there proof, or is this another Kendrick situation? That's a brutal legacy to have, being known as someone who fabricates their involvement in important moments. That reputation is almost impossible to recover from in hip-hop, where authenticity is everything. What we're seeing here is way bigger than just two rappers having a disagreement. This situation has massive implications for how we view artist narratives, legacy building, and truth in hip-hop moving forward. The bigger conversation happening across social media and hip-hop forums is about accountability. In the streaming era with social media everywhere, you can't just tell lies about your history anymore, because somebody somewhere has the receipts. Kendrick is setting a precedent that if you're going to use someone else's name to boost your legacy, you better make sure your story is accurate. And honestly, that's healthy for the culture. For too long, certain artists have been able to rewrite history, claim credit they didn't earn, and insert themselves into narratives that made them look better. But now, with vault recordings, old social media posts, time-stamped evidence, the truth always comes out eventually. This is also a warning to anyone with a platform and an audience. When you constantly bring up other successful people's names to boost yourself, when you create stories that make you look like you were integral to their success, you're not just building your brand, you're unintentionally creating enemies and resentment. And in Kendrick's case, you're giving them motivation to eventually set the record straight in the most devastating way possible. The Game situation is a wild example, but it's also a warning for anybody with a following who might be tempted to exaggerate their involvement in other people's come-up stories. The internet has a long memory. Recordings exist, screenshots exist, and eventually the truth emerges. There's also something to be said about the difference between how older generations of artists handled these situations versus how it's happening now. In the past, someone like Game could tell his version of events, and unless you were directly involved, you'd just have to accept it as probably true. But now, artists have the tools to document everything, preserve evidence, and release it at strategic moments. Kendrick essentially created his own insurance policy 15 years ago. He knew even back then that Game's story didn't match reality, so he recorded his own version, time-stamped it, and kept it safe. That's next-level strategic thinking that younger artists should honestly learn from. The responsibility of social media and public platforms is also part of this conversation.
Podcasters and interviewers let Game tell the "I discovered Kendrick" story dozens of times without ever fact-checking or pushing back. They just let him cook because it made for interesting content. But now we see the danger of letting narratives go unchallenged. Eventually, the truth comes out, and everyone who platformed the lie looks bad too. Moving forward, we'll probably see more artists being careful about how they tell stories involving other artists. We might see more fact-checking from media outlets before they let someone claim credit for another artist's success. And we'll definitely see more vault recordings being released as artists protect their legacies with documented evidence. So where does this leave the game right now? And what comes next in this absolutely insane situation?
Game has been completely silent since this recording dropped. Not a single tweet, no Instagram statement, no response track, nothing. That silence is loud and honestly kind of suspicious. You're telling me one of the most active rappers on social media, someone who always has something to say, who responds to everything, is just quiet now? That doesn't make sense unless he's in full crisis mode. People are speculating about what's happening behind the scenes. Is Game lawyering up? Is he trying to figure out if there's any legal angle to suppress the recording? Is he preparing a massive response that will somehow turn this around? Or is he just hiding because he knows there's no way to win this? The smart money is on option 3. When someone has time-stamped evidence that directly contradicts your story, there's no spin that makes you look good. Your best option is to stay quiet, let the storm pass, and hope people eventually move on to the next controversy. But here's the thing, the internet doesn't forget. This isn't going away. This recording will be referenced in hip-hop discussions for decades. Anytime Game's name comes up, someone will mention, yeah, but remember when Kendrick exposed him lying about the discovery story? That's permanent damage. And people are asking the questions that should genuinely keep Game up at night. What else is in Kendrick's vault? If he has a 6-minute detailed recording about Game, what other documentation exists? Who else is on those tapes? Drake? J. Cole? Other West Coast rappers who might have underestimated him or crossed him over the years? That's terrifying to think about. Kendrick might have an entire archive of receipts just waiting to be deployed if anyone steps out of line. He's like the hip-hop FBI with classified documents on everybody who ever doubted him. Was this revenge or strategic career protection? Did Kendrick drop this specifically to destroy Game, or was it a defensive move to finally shut down a lie that was hurting his actual narrative? Because there's a difference between offensive attack and defensive correction. Why did Punch and TDE co-sign this now? What changed? Did Game say something recently that was the final straw? Or has TDE been planning this release for months, waiting for the perfect moment in the media cycle? And what about that Bishop Lamont and Lil Wayne situation Kendrick hinted at? Is that another vault recording waiting to drop? Is there more to this story that we haven't even touched yet? The speculation is driving the internet absolutely crazy because everyone wants answers, but nobody has them except Kendrick and his team. And knowing Kendrick, he's not saying anything else. He's just watching the chaos unfold, knowing he's already said everything that needed to be said. Here's what legitimately terrifies me about this whole thing, though. Kendrick Lamar doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't drop songs by accident. He doesn't let vaults leak randomly. Every single move is calculated 10 steps ahead. So if this tape just happened to resurface right when Game is doing interviews talking about the old days, was it really an accident? Or is this Kendrick doing what he does best, waiting in the shadows, letting people bury themselves, and then dropping receipts at the exact perfect moment for maximum destruction? The fallout from this is just beginning. Stay locked in because this story is about to get even crazier in the coming days and weeks. More details are dropping every hour. More people are coming forward with their own stories about Game's pattern of narrative manipulation. Reports say Game might finally break his silence soon with some kind of response. Though honestly, what can he even say at this point? The internet is watching every single development. Game's career is legitimately on life support right now. And Kendrick, he's already 3 steps ahead of everyone, like he always is. So I need to know what you think about this absolutely insane situation. Drop your thoughts in the comments right now. Do you think Game can recover from this level of exposure? Is there any possible response that saves his credibility? And do you think Kendrick was justified dropping this nuclear bomb after 15 years of Game telling the same lie? Or should he have just let it go?
Also, and this is important, do you think Kendrick has more vault recordings about other artists? Because if he documented his entire come-up this thoroughly, who else is sitting on a time bomb they don't even know about? Make sure you absolutely smash that like button if this video gave you all the context and breakdown you needed. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because we are covering every single twist and development as this story continues to unfold. More information is coming out literally by the hour, and you do not want to miss a single update. The game situation proves something we should all remember. The truth always comes out eventually. You can tell lies for years, you can build a whole narrative around yourself, but in the end, receipts matter more than stories. And Kendrick Lamar just taught the entire hip-hop world a masterclass in patience, strategy, and the power of documented evidence. I appreciate every single one of you for rocking with me and watching all the way to the end. This might be the wildest hip-hop story of the entire year, and we're here to witness it together. I'll see you in the next video with more updates, more analysis, and more breaking news as this situation continues to develop. Stay safe out there, and remember, in the age of social media and vault recordings, your legacy is only as solid as the truth behind it.